find. Just finding one thing I forgot to mark. Okay, starting סימן ה', first of probably 2, maybe 3 shiurim on סימן ה'. סימן ה' deals with דיני סירוס, and the topics that are discussed in this סימן are סירוס ish, סירוס isha, סירוס behema. סירוס is done because of a sickness, difference between a sickness and b'dei adam, b'dei shamayim, and temporary סירוס, temporary prevention of having children, birth control. We're not going to get to everything today. We'll go through the topics, say what it says in the poskim, and say more practical as we get to today. On the practical level, there are certain operations which could cause סירוס, or a chashashis of סירוס, that they were discussed in the poskim. There are certain procedures, we'll call them, that are done for infertility treatments, which also there's a discussion between the poskim, what is their status. There are sometimes operations or procedures that are done to correct defects or problems that there are in the reproduction system of the man or of the woman. And the other question is based on which procedure is done. Is the person become asur lavoi bakol or not? Is there a chiyuv to repair it? And birth control, which is the last topic. And I'm going to try to keep somewhat to the seder of the seifim and focus on the practical part. First, we'll just go through the halachas and the different shittas that are there. In the previous simanim, we learned about Isurei Lavoi Bakol, Mamzedus cases, Mamzedus halachas. The pasuk regarding Mamzedus is in Dvarim Perek Chav Gimel, pasuk Gimel, and if you look one pasuk beforehand, it talks about Tzuadaka and Krus Shavcha, also Asurim Lavoi Bakol. By the way, just an interesting thing to point out, you look in the beginning of the Siman, and every print of the Shulchan Aruch, when it writes Psuadaka, writes Psuadaka with an Aleph, not with a Hey, which is the way we write in the Sefer Torah Psuadaka, and obviously today's Milaktim, because they wanted to make sure that nobody Chas v'Shalom makes a mistake to write a Sefer Torah Lubavitcher, so all the Milaktim of today, right in the beginning of the Siman, they have a little ice. They explain why, even though it's written Daka with Aleph, and Shulchan Aruch really you're supposed to write it with a Hey, but we know we write it with an Aleph. Siman Sif Aleph, the Mechaber opens up by saying, Psuadaka and Krushavcha are asur lavoi bakol. They're not allowed to marry a Yisraelis, a Jewish woman, even if she's an Ailoinis or an Akare. It's a Psul Chitun, it's asur lavoi bakol. She's not allowed to be Mekadesh, she's not allowed to get married to a woman, even if she's not able to have kids. But he is allowed to marry a Giyaris or a Meshucheres, because the pasuk says, L'yavo b'kahal Hashem. Geirim and Meshuchrarim is not part of the Kahal Hashem. Now, whoever remembers, there was a discussion in previous Simanim whether the descendants, or when we discussed about Mamzedim and Geirim getting married, if it also applies to generations later. A few generations later, as long as they remember that the name Ger is on them, if the father is a Ger, Bas Ger v'Yisraelis, she's allowed to marry a Mamzer. And it's interesting, there's a machlekes whether a Psuadaka is allowed to marry this kind of woman, a woman that her father is a Ger and her mother is Jewish, and the Tzemach Tzedek paskins pretty clearly in Siman Yudches and Even העזר that definitely could marry the daughter of a ger and a Yisraelis, and even a few generations later, as long as there's still the shame of gerus on it. That's the maskanas Tzemach Tzedek in Siman Yudches. Then the Mechaber continues, even a kohen who is a ptsuadaka can also marry these giyoris, etc., which are not part of Kahal Hashem. What is the reason for it? There is some reasons given. Some say because the kohen is lost his kedusha, he's not considered a kohen for all practical purposes, and therefore he is mutter to marry these women. There's an isser for a kohen to marry a giyoris. But in this scenario, when he's no longer a kohen, now that idea, that's one some shittus. Other ones say that he is considered like a chalal in all practical purposes when it comes to, and he's considered a chalal when it comes to yuchsin and those kinds of things that is considered a chalal, but he is still allowed to marry a giyoris. Now, the Tzemach Tzedek takes the approach that this person is it seems like the Tzemach Tzedek takes the approach this person is completely has no kedusha. Why is that? If you know on the Tzemach Tzedek, I don't know if you ever saw it, but when you look in the Sefer Tshuvos of Tzemach Tzedek, we'll just give you a quick book review. You have in the back of the Tzemach Tzedek, you have mafteches, and then you have ha'aris. So in the first print, there's only mafteches that were written by whoever made the mafteches. And the first print, there was a Rav in New York, Rabbi Viderevich, and in later editions, mafteches were made. Some were made by the Rebbe. When the Rebbe printed the new volumes, and some were made later by Rabbi Levin from the library. After the mafteches, the Rebbe, when he printed it the first time, put also ha'aris, which is from the Rebbe. Now, some of them mention if there's like different kisvayad, and some of them also have like extra pieces that were written on the printed afterwards in the back of the tshuva. Sometimes there was extra comments or summaries or things that they found later. A lot of them were printed in the back of some of them were even printed later in the later editions of Tzemach Tzedek. When they uploaded all the books from the Russian library to online a few years ago, so there is over there a set of Tzemach Tzedeks which l'cha'ira belong to the Rebbe Rashab. That's what it looks like. And over there, there's Kisvei Yad, most of them from the Rebbe Rashab, one or two places from the Frierdiker Rebbe. It seems like it was copied from a previous one where you have those comments that were there originally in the first, that were on the Kisvei Yad of Tzemach Tzedek. That means there's a tshuva, and on the back, Tzemach Tzedek would write like maybe he would add a piece that was, or a question or something that was relevant to it. So I went through it then, and whatever was not printed in the book, I printed in Kevetz Yisrael. So there's an interesting tshuva in Siman Tes Zayin, which I'm not going to get to it right now. I'm not going to get to it today. But on the Hagoy in Ksavet Kodesh, the following words it says, it's talking about the din of Rabbeinu Tam, and then it says, Koyen p'tsuadaka, koyen lav b'kedusha koi. Kohen of Ptsuadaka doesn't have his kedusha anymore. Lav b'kedusha koi. That's the lashon of Tzemach Tzedek. So obviously he's taking the approach that this kohen Ptsuadaka kedushavcha is not a kohen. It's not. He doesn't have a kedusha of a kohen anymore. That's why, and l'chayra fits with those opinions. That's the reason why he's not getting married. Not that he's a chalal, and we're matter for him to marry a giyoris. Now, could he marry a mamzeres? So there's a machlokes. The Mechaber says that it's mutter. The Ramah says that yesh oimrim. The Ramah says that even though, the Mechaber says it's asur, and the Ramah says yesh oimrim that it's mutter. The Ramah says yesh oimrim that it's mutter, and therefore he is, some people pass in one way, some people pass in the other way. Now, we know that it's an interesting question that comes up. We know that a woman is not allowed, a woman, a ger, shlachatchila, we're not megayer l'shem ishus. Whatever the definition means, I'm not going to get into it right now. If it's only l'shem ishus, if it's also l'shem ishus, but the eved, girus l'shem ishus is considered, according to a lot of poskim, as kosher. But the question is, if you have a psuadaka, could he be megayer a woman for the purpose of marriage? So if you say, we know that the only reason that they're going to get married is going to convert is because he wants to marry her. So it's clearly l'shem ishus. So Shas Tshuvas Beis Yitzchak in סימן Vav writes that b'diavad it's definitely kosher, and maybe even l'chatchila is allowed to do it. It's not machriya, but it's not to say that l'chatchila a pseudaka klushavcha could convince a woman to convert for the purpose of him getting married. It's not considered, and it would be considered kosher, even though usually when it comes to gerus l'shem ishus, we will not allow such a thing. Now, what does it mean, asur lavei bakol? Asur lavei bakol means that if a person did go ahead and marry a woman that he's not allowed to marry, he has to give her a get. Now, what happens if?
Does he have a svara why? Give a svara why maybe the challah?
He discusses it. I don't remember offhand now. There's a discussion about it. He explains why, but the evidence is for sure fine. Even he says he's noted to say even the chatchila is fine. Now, if a person, I'm not focusing so much on, I'm just going to the Maisa part of it. If a person gets married to a woman, b'kashrusay, well, he was fine. And then he became p'tzuadaka. Something happened to him. Does he have to divorce the woman or not? So, the majority of the poskim, including the Chasam Sofer, Sharideos, they hold that he does have to divorce her. And there are some which say that if she is ready to continue living with him, she's willing to stay with him, then he does not have to divorce her because he married her in Beheter. That depends on how to understand what the Isser is. If the Isser, Asur lavei bakol, is the Isser of being married or Isser of getting married, the majority of poskim hold that the Isser is being married to such a woman, and you'll see why. It depends on what the reason of p'tzuadaka is. So for the reason of the Isser, we're going to get to it in a minute. Now, what happens if a person is a suffix p'tzuadaka? Then you have a bunch of shittas, what to deal with it. There's a chikrei leiv, Shuvas chikrei leiv, a sfadashe, he goes through the shittas and he's moichiach. There are some shittas which hold that midiraise is mutter to marry a Yisraelis. Midrabanan, it's also to marry a Yisraelis. And some that say that it's a suffix deraisa, and therefore you have to be machmer. And some he goes through that the different shittas. Then you have the Teres Chesed, we all know Teres Chesed and the Chalkas Yaakov and a bunch of other ones, where they hold that it's even in a Torah is allowed to marry Yisraelis. And then you have the Avnei Nezer, which comes with an interesting mahalach that yes, even midiraisa, if suffix tzedakah is allowed to marry Yisraelis, the Isser does not apply to a suffix. And he explains that even those who are machmir will still hold that you don't have to be megarish if you did it, but yeah, that's fine. That means even those who are machmir, even those who say that it's a suffix deraisa and l'chatchila you should be machmir, they will still paskin that you don't have to do that you're not chayiv legarish this woman if you married her. Now, what is the reason for Isur lavei bakol, p'tzuadaka, and krushavcha? There are basically three reasons. One historical, one practical, and one, we'll call it ideological. Three reasons. The only Rishonim. First, we go with the historical reason. The Sefer HaChinuch says that, this we all know from Gilas Esther, that every king would have sarisim. What was sarisim? The people who were in charge of taking care of the woman. Now, they wanted to make sure the woman are not hurt, so there would be mesadas, the men who would take care of the woman. And whoever wanted to be, what was the easiest way, since it wasn't such a, people didn't want to be mesurasim so fast. So it was like an incentive. If you want to be in the king's court, the quickest way to get a job in the king's court was to become a saris. And therefore the Chinuch says this was a thing which always was around. The Torah said, we want to prevent you from doing these crazy things, and it's also. That's the reason that the Sefer HaChinuch brings. That's a historical reason. Today, that's not. Today, there's no kings don't ask the people to be misstatus to get a job. Today, it's the media convinces you to get סירוס. It's a separate thing, so we're not going to get to it. Now it's more in the political view. That's the political reason, which we're not going to discuss. But now what we see, Sefer HaChinuch, the reason still applies today. The practical reason is that Ivid, when he writes on the Rambam, that practical. If a woman is married to a man who can't provide for her these things, then she can be mizana. So why are you creating a situation that a woman is going to be mizana with somebody else? You're going to put her in an impossible situation. She's not going to get what she needs. Therefore, Torah was aizer to create a marriage which is going to bring tuznus, to isur. And then you have the ideological reason. The ideological reason is the Rabbeinu Bachai on the pasuk and the Cheskuni on the pasuk, which they say that it is because, also the ניתוחים actually says that reason, is because what is the whole purpose of getting married? The purpose is to have kids. That's the reason behind marriage. If you're going to get married in a marriage which has no chance of bearing children, then the Torah did not want to have such a marriage take place. That is that reason. So now, if you look at those reasons, that also will explain to you, you can understand the svaris for the machlekes, whether if a person got married beheter, and then he became tzodaka, if he has to divorce her or not. Based on these reasons, you could understand some of the poskim will follow different reasons. That's if aleph. This is the introduction to this topic. Yeah, what is Nasif Beis? The Mechaber starts explaining what each isur is. So what is a ptsuadaka? That the beitzim, the testicles were hurt. The Beis Shmuel says, Makas cherev oisakin. It was hurt with a knife or with a sword. We're soon going to see in the Tzemach Tzedek that it's nishtazei pashat, that it's only by metal. It's nishtazei pashat what it exactly means, but we'll get to it soon. That's one way. Ptsua. What's daka? That it got crushed by something. Nidoich b'meducha, crushed by something. What's a krushavcha? At nichras hagid, it got cut completely. What does cut? The Beis Shmuel says nechtach l'shnayim, got cut into two. Where could a person get hurt, get cut, get punctured, get smashed to become a ptsuadaka? Three places: gid, beitzim, shvilim. Gid is what you see. The gid is the aver. Now the way is you have the aver, the place is close to the body. Then you have the atara, which is the area which is right around where the bris milah is done. And then you have what's called l'mayla ma'atara, which is on top of that, facing towards the outside. So it starts with the gid. In front of the gid you have the atara. And then l'mayla ma'atara is only the crown, the circle, and then you have l'mayla ma'atara, which is above it. Today, when we refer to or discuss atara, we talk about the whole thing. But atara, when it comes to here, it just refers to the beginning part of it, and then you have what we call more flesh further up. That's l'mayla ma'atara. So gid, beitzim, and shvilim. Beitzim is testicles. Shvilim is the path through which shechva zera travels. That's inside the aver. And in any of these, if it's nifza, if it got hurt, if it's nichras, if it got cut, if it's nidoich, if it got crushed, it's all possible. Doesn't mean one, doesn't mean a few. That's the whole discussion on Shulchan Aruch and the Poskim. And what's the reason? You become possible because you become a cheskas shenei moilid. Once you become a cheskas shenei moilid, if a person does have kids, they are becheskas mamzerim. Because since there's no chance this guy can have kids, obviously this kid did not come from him.
What about DNA test?
DNA testing?
We don't do DNA is not enough halachically for these things. Yeah.
Doesn't that clearly go with the third reason that like Easter is the time you can't have kids? Like where's the
Shaloi sizne ishta you talking about?
Yeah, no, that's not the reason because I'm saying like it's clearly if what's negay over here is the damage enough to the extent that it can't be made.
That's the result.
Right, that's all we care about.
Right, because the mechaber, it seems like he takes that's the usually the main reason is because it can't be made.
Where do we see like for any other reasons?
I'm still talking about what the logic behind it is. That's the logic behind it. Now, there is the Noida Behuda takes in Even Ezer Siman Vav says that by nidoichu crushed, it has to be a roiv of the aver, a roiv of the beitza, not just a little bit. And there are those that are chaylik on him, and we're soon going to see by the Tzemach Tzedek also what he discusses about it. That's Sif Beis, we'll jump to Sif Daled. Nikav, if there's puncture, Nikav lemata ma'atore. Sorry, I meant to say lemata ma'atore means past it. I said before l'mayla ma'atore mixed up. Lemata ma'atore means from the atore going down, not l'mayla. Sorry for the mistake. Lemata ma'atore means you have the gid, then you have the atore, then you have lemata ma'atore is from the atore going downwards. I mixed up lemata and l'mayla. So
Which one is possible? All of them?
Lamata is just telling you a clarification. Before I said Lamaila Matara means when we say Lamaila is closer to the body, Lamata is further away from the body. And that Tara is that part. So I just mixed up the two, and probably not the first one to mix them up. So if there's a neck of Lamata Matara, it's kosher. If that Tara itself has a nekev, so the Mechaber says that if Shichva Zera comes out through that nekev, then it's possible. If this nekev closes up and he became cured, Chazar Lechsheri becomes kosher again. And we rely on the doctors to say that as you can on the page tell you, we rely on the doctors to say that he was Chazar Lechsheri. And when do we rely on the doctors? That you don't have to see if he's Chazar Lechsheri or not, is when the doctors were the ones that repaired the damage, then they were trusted. Otherwise, there is a different discussion. I'm not going to get into it now. How, if there's a need to do a test, or how to get to this test to see if this hole is fine or not. Based on this, that by a nikav, if it got closed and it got cured and it's chazal lechsherei, there's an interesting chasam sefer Siman Yudaled that by nikav. If it's nikav, take he is pasul lavei bakol, but he's not allowed to marry psuli kol. Why? Because maybe it's going to get cured. Shulchan Aruch gives you an option that's going to get cured. It's not something which gets cut off that you can't grow a new one. It's something which is practical. There's a hole, and it's not crushed. It's a hole, and the hole could close up, and you'll be back again. That is the chasam sefer. The Chutam Meshulash, Chaim Volozhner, Chelakav Siman Yud Gimel, disagrees and holds that it is mutter. We didn't make a differentiation in these things. Chelakav Siman Yud Gimel. That's if dalat, if hey, if it was nikav lamata ma'atore, the hole started in the beginning in lamata ma'atore, means the furthest away from the body, and then the exit of the means ma'aver la'aver, and the exit of this nekev is in the atore, it's possible. Sivav says if the nistam, if the shvil of Shichva Zera got stuck, got blocked, and he sees Shichva Zera through the shvil of Meiraglaim, it's also possible. And we're soon going to see what it means, these whole shvilim, and how it fits with today's understanding of medicine. What is the hole? How big is the hole which is paisel? Again, we're going to go later to Tzemach Tzedek. First, I'm going to go through what's on the regular, the ones over here. The Beis Shmuel says that if that Torah itself got punctured, then it's possible. Then it's possible only only if it's big enough that Shechva Zera could come out of it, but otherwise it's not. The Taz says, no, the Taz says that if it's me'ever le'ever, it's from side to side, fully through the puncture, then it's in that Torah, then it's even any size hole is a problem. But if it's only from one, if it's not exit, if it's a hole which starts a puncture on one side, doesn't exit from the other side, then it needs to be a nekev that Shechva Zera will come out of it. Now, that is regarding because we're talking about nikav and nikav, I just wanted to point that out. Now, let's go back to the shvilim, because we discussed the shvilim, nistam shvil Shechva Zera, or shvil me'reglaim. The way it's understood from the Gemara is, and the Gemara does not go into details where and how, is that every person has two shvilim. One shvil brings out me'reglaim, and one shvil brings out Shechvas Zera. Yeah. So we'll get to it in the Chazon Ish in a second. So that's what it says in the Gemara. Today we know reality is that in the body there's two different channels. But in the beginning of the Eiver is there, but then it merges into one canal from where everything comes out. So like Tzemach mentioned over here, the Chazon Ish says, Nishtanu ativim. Taka Amol was like that, today is different. And therefore, he says, once the nikav, when he says that there's a nekev and the shvilim, it refers to this common path in the Eiver. But he says, but it does not refer to anything inside the body. That means the Shulchan Aruch gives you three places, Gid, Beitzim, Shvilim. It's only what's in the Eiver outside from the body out, not inside the body. So anything happens inside the body does not make a person possible. And therefore, in the prostate operation, which is done inside the body, he held that it's not, it does not make a person possible regardless of what happens. Yeah, that's and the Minchas Yitzchak Chelik Ches סימן קכ"ד Paskin the Chazon Ish and Chelik Yaakov סימן Chavtes and סימן Lamed and Niglas Moshe Chelik Dalet סימן Tzadik Dalet. That is Shit of the Chazon Ish. However, the Rebbe took a completely different approach to it, and the Rebbe actually was one of the things that the Rebbe asked to be mefarsim. A few letters from the Rebbe on this topic. If you have in Shulchan Menachem, you have 4 or 5 letters on this topic. Actually, no, they have like 3 letters, but there's another 2 on Igros that somehow didn't make it into the book. And the most famous one is a letter which was printed is in Chelik Chav Gimel, page Shin Tes. That letter was sent to the Mareches of Eitzer HaPoskim, where the Rebbe tells them that we have to, because Eitzer HaPoskim mentioned it in passing in Chelik Aleph, which is where the Siman is discussed, and the Rebbe says you have to mention it further with more arichas and be mefarsim. It says you have to work on the doctors that they should not do any damage to these shvilim inside the body before they start the operation. Rather, they should wait until after the operation. Just makes the operation a little bit more difficult for the doctor. If they know what they're doing, it's fine. And then they'll see that they're not that they could do without cutting. And enough doctors will do it, and other doctors will also stop cutting before the operation. Today, there's no cutting. Today, everything is done. Today, the operations are done much smaller incisions, and today it's usually not a problem. Based on the Rebbe's request, this was printed in Hamoir in that time, the Rebbe's letter, and in Eitzer HaPoskim Chelik Tes, where it was printed based on the Rebbe's request. There's a much earlier letter from the Rebbe, Nigros Chelik Tes, page Reish Hey, where the Rebbe interestingly points out, he says, even though Ikar Shechva Zera comes from the Beitzim, which is what we're going to see and discuss more the practical part of it later, still in all, also from the prostat hapnimi shebeguf, also adds something to it. And the Rebbe's lashon is with tzorich iyun im bil'adei chomorim elu haboim mehaprostat yesh lahamashke hayoytze din shechva zera al pitayra. That means when you remove if you cut something inside, and it might put into question the status of what's outside. So it's pretty clear that the Rebbe didn't take the approach that that you just look at what's outside the body, like the way the Chazon Ish took the approach, or rather pretty clearly that you do not take that approach, and even inside, those shvulim, even going into the body, are still a problem if there's any damage done to them. It could become a shaila. The same letter from the Rebbe to Eitzer HaPoskim also discusses operations that are done. The Beis, we're not going to get to it right now. Shas Tshuvas Cheshev Eifoid, Chelik Beis, Siman Ches, also takes the same approach as the Rebbe, and he writes pretty clearly, the Rebbe didn't write so clearly, but he writes pretty clearly that it refers to anything which is inside the body also, and therefore he's machmer by a prostate. Cheshev Eifoid was Rav Padva from England. Now let's continue. If we say that this is until if there was a damage to the atara, right? Now we're going to move to the beitza. If it says if zayin, it says if nichras, if it got cut, niftzai, nidoich, nechsar, nikav, got punctured, it got removed, got hurt, got cut out, got crushed. In the Lashon Shulchan Aruch is b'shnei beitzim or be'echad mehem, both of the beitzim or even one of them, it's possible. The Rama brings the shit of Rabbeinu Tam that some are matir if the Beitzah Shel Shmuel was removed and the Beitzah Shel Yamin remained. The Rama says Tev lachush be'isur de'iraisa l'divrei ha'machmirim shem roiv minyan v'roiv binyan. I'm not going to get into the discussion this left versus right now. I'm actually going to skip that topic and go back to something else. But just interesting to point out that Tzemach Tzedek in Chidushim on Maseches Yevamis, in Chelik Beis and Chidushim, he says Ha'ikar Kisvara Harishayna on this seif. But let's go now to what the Tzemach Tzedek discusses about Nikav, which I mentioned to you before that it's irrelevant. So it's Chidushim on Maseches Yevamis. Now if you look in Chidushim al Hashas, I also mentioned it to you in the past, Chidushim al Hashas, what was printed, the first print is what they had then. Then after the printing, they found other things which were printed in the back of Piskei Dinim. The back of Piskei Dinim, the Piskei Dinim I think was the last one that was printed in Europe, and there's a bunch of, there's a Chidushim on certain Masechtas. One of them is on Yevamis, which was then reprinted, aside from being printed in Piskei Dinim, in the back of Piskei Dinim, like in the old print, it's also printed in the new print of Chidushim al Hashas in the back. It means the Chidushim al Hashas, the new print. I think in Eiduvin you see a lot of times they have both of them. I mentioned you both. What's called Chelik Beis of Chidushim is what they found after the first print of Chidushim. So over there, we'll call it in the Chelik Beis of Chidushim or in Piskei Dinim in page 742, and in Chidushim in page Reish Yud Gimel. Over there, you have the Chidushim Maseches Yevamis, which has one very interesting thing that you don't see in any other Chidushim al Shas from the Tzemach Tzedek, that after every section of Chidushim, the Tzemach Tzedek has a paragraph called Din, which is basically a summary of the Psak, what comes out. Usually Chidushim is like Chidushim, it's not all the Maisa. Right? In Hilchos Eruvin, we learned a lot of things in the Chidushim. It's pretty clear that it's certain things over there are Lamaisa, and we discussed them, but it's not on the category of Din, like a Psak. In this Chidushim Maseches Yevamis, there is, if you look in the Piskei Dinim, the way it's designed in the Chidushim, it's not so clear, but if you look in the Chidushim, the way it's designed in the original Piskei Dinim, you have the Chidushim in two columns, and under it you have a big bold letters, Din, with a summary of what it is. Like as if it's like a Psak Din. So over there, let's go back to it. Over there it discusses, he says that a nekev, he says we must say that if we're talking about a nekev mefulish from side to side, when it comes in the beitzim, there has no shear. Only a nekev the she'eina mefulish, that's a nekev which needs a shear. Why? Because he says by nechsar we say that the shear is mashu, which you're going to see. Which you're going to see what the shear is. His nechsar is mashu. So therefore, if you say that nechsar, why does he have to say nechsar is less than nikav, less of an issue than nikav? And so if nechsar, for the shear of nechsar is mashu, the shear of nikav should definitely be mashu. So obviously the fact that there's no shear of nikav mentioned. So therefore, that means that you have to say that by a nekav mefulish there's no shear. Only by a nekev she'eina mefulish, that's where we have to discuss a shear. And that's Tzemach Tzedek says. So therefore, let's look at another place in halacha where you have a discussion of nekev, and we will take it from there. Where's the other place you have a discussion of nekev in halacha? In the dinim of an esrog. The esrog has the skin, which we call the thick skin, and then it has the seeds, also zroim, also zera. Yeah, chadrei hazera. That's when it comes to esrog. So by esrog it says if it's a nekev mefulish, it's possible even if there's no nechsar, if there's nothing is missing from it, as long as it's nekev mefulish. Only if it's a nekev she'eino mefulish, that's when the halacha gets into whole discussion when it comes to esrog. And the Tzemach Tzedek says v'kach yesh loimer bekan. Over here also you have to say the same thing. That's the Tzemach Tzedek, the first paragraph of the chidushim on this. Huh? He explains in the, he brings the definition.
Why he's able to compare it to the esrog?
Doesn't specifically say. He compares this with Yeshua Kachel Bekan, and he explains how it's comparable.
What is your answer?
If it's mefulish, not by any mefulish, so it gets to the Chadrei Azera or something. Let's go. So then the Tzemach Tzedek goes back and says afterwards. He says that you can't say that it's totally in nechsar or not when it comes to nikav. You can't say that has to do if it's missing something. Rather, the nekev that has to be, it's a nekev which is able to be moitzi shichva zera, not stam a nekev. When it's one-sided nekev, not when it's mefulish, one-sided nekev. So what is it? He says in this lashon, sheyinakiv be'oimek. It punctures all the way into the inner part of the beitza. Until it pours out the shichva zera that's in the beitza through this nekev. If it doesn't go all the way so deep to that part of the beitza and create a shichva zera, ein nifsal. Doesn't become possible. Even though there's a poisel, even though it doesn't go further. That's the next part of the Tzemach Tzedek. So then it continues and says, no, but we have the Marshal, and the Marshal holds that you always need mefulish, and according to the Marshal it seems that even if it's not mefulish, then it's not osir in any way, shape or form. And the Tzemach Tzedek says that it's not so. Rabbi Yeruchim paskins that by a nekev she'eino mefulish nitz she'etz shichva zera when it's nikav beitzim, and therefore that's how the Tzemach Tzedek seems like to paskin. He and the Tzemach Tzedek also points out that Rabbi Yeruchim was machmir also by the even nistam. It's not choizel lechshere, and the Tzemach Tzedek says sorry, chiyuv from that Rabbi Yeruchim got it, doesn't want to paskin like Rabbi Yeruchim on that point. But on the point that you need a nekev through shichva zera comes out, but you don't need mefulish to make a person possible like the Marshal, then that, and it's not kol shehu if it's not mefulish, that the paskins like Rabbi Yeruchim. And Tzemach Tzedek continues over there. It's already rolling on page 744 in the Piskei Dinim and page Reish Yudal in Chidushim. Interesting point to point out that a nikav and potsua, when it comes to a gid, a nikav potsua is not medin krus shavcha, even by a gid, it's only medin ptsuadaka. And therefore, since it's medin ptsuadaka, so if stima moyelas, because by krus shavcha there's no cure for it. By ptsuadaka there is a cure for it. If it's cured, then it goes back to chazal achshere. So he says that the nikav and the nistam and all these things by in this scenario by beitzim it's medin krushavcha, not medin ptsuadaka, and therefore if it's nistam and chazal, it's chazal echshere.
Which one is nistam chazal echshere?
Nistam ptsuadaka, if it cures, chazal echshere. Krushavcha not. Once something gets cut off, the whole thing gets cut off, we can't sew it back on. Maybe you could if you have it, but he says, and even though the Ra'am says that that it's medin krushavcha, the halacha is not like the Ra'am, the halacha is like the Paskin Shulchan Aruch, that's not like that, and therefore we say it's medin ptsuadaka. And the Tzemach Tzedek concludes with this paragraph by saying, din, what's the din? First of all, that the Iker is not like the Ramah, but like the Mechaber, that there is no difference if Beitz Achas, Shtei Beitzim, Yamin, Smoil, all these differentiations of Shulchan Aruch don't, there's no differentiation. If it's Beitz Achas, or B'Shneim, it's all considered asr, and the ikr is like the shit of the mechaber, not like the shit of the Ramah. Number two, that even though the Marshal holds that for nikav in the Beitza you always need le'ever from side to side mefulosh, it's not considered, that's not how the halacha is, but if it's nikav from one side, then you follow like the Rabbeinu Yerucham, that if it's nikav ba'omek kol kach, it went through so deep, sheyetze shechva zera min hanekev min habeitza, that it will cause that shechva zera comes from the beitza through this hole, it's possible. And the Tzemach Tzedek writes in the shit of the Marshal, v'kach nirel nizdai ti'ikar. But if it gets closed up and it gets cured, it works. Not like the Rabbeinu Yerucham, and Tzemach Tzedek adds in it, why not like Rabbeinu Yerucham? Because ein kein das kol ha-poskim. The poskim don't hold like it. That is basically what Tzemach Tzedek says on this specific topic. The whole discussion about right versus left, and I'm going to get to it now. Now, regarding nikvu ha-beitza. What about a patsua in the beitza? So Tzemach Tzedek there continues in the same chidushim. After he writes his din about nikav, he goes to the next topic, which is patsua, which is also in Shulchan Aruch. We have nikav, we have nifza in the beitza, and he says that some people say yesh omrim, that we follow, that it depends on whether this nifza causes blood to come out. If blood came out, even if no shechva zera came out, the person is possible. There are some which hold that you dafka need with metal. Something metal hurts it. That's what we saw in the Bishmo. Yeah, cherev or sakin. Yesh omrim, that it makes no difference in any of them. It's as long as there was a good zetz, b'koyach, then that's what makes a difference. And if it's b'koyach, then it's possible even if it's not with metal. And if it's not b'koyach, it's not possible even if it's done by metal. And that it's also another point is that if we do compare it to nikav, that if there was no maka b'koyach, then we say it has to be shechva zera coming out through this petza, and if not, the person is not possible. And the Tzemach Tzedek says, "L'maiseh, efshar sheyesh lahokol kishnei asvaris." Maybe we could be making like both svaris. Kasheyesh sniff lahokol. If you have another sniff to be makel, you could be makel by combining both. Not when you have, because you have another sniff to be makel. Because there is another sniff to be makel. Why? Came on the belav hachi loy breira milsa the petza gomor nami loy beinen sheyetze shechva zera. Because it's not so clear that by the petza gomor you don't need the requirement of yetze shechva zera. So therefore you could be makel like both. Shittas sai, the mashmos of it is that you makel it's sai bekoyach and sai and sheyetze shechva zera when you have another reason. Mikol mokim the Tzemach Tzedek is tzarich, it doesn't pass on the ma'isa.
What was the other sniff to make over here?
He says the other sniff is it's not because he says it could be makel like that it could be makel like the shit that's combined together. Why? Because it's not clear bichlal that maybe that the idea that sheyetze shechva zera only applies to nikav and not to patsua. It's not clear that's.
The point of bullshit is you have to have yetze shechva zera.
No, so Tzemach Tzedek says because it's not clear whether you need to have yetze shechva zera or not. And there is a strong enough svara to say that you do need it even here by patsua. Therefore, by patsua, you don't follow one shitta. You could be mekel according to all the shittas together. So if there's no blood coming out, or it wasn't barzel, it wasn't bekoyach, all of them, you can combine all them together, and you could be mekel in all possible ways. Huh?
Blood has to be the whole time. Like right now, it has to be blood coming out. Not that it had blood.
No, it had blood when it got hurt.
But it could be the strapping.
They have to see, no, if it got crushed in such a way that blood came out. It's not nisrape, it has to be nisrape inside, not just because it stopped bleeding. That's Sif Zayin, we're going to go Sif Ches, and we're going to go into the medical part. Sif Ches, if nichlis suchute beitzim, they were nichras, the chutim, or one of them, obviously because the Beis Yosef follows, Mechaber follows the shitta, that it makes no difference, one or two or more. Oy nidich, if it's nidich, a niftzag, a crushed, got hurt, it's all possible. And the Beis Shmuel points out that according to Shittat Rabbeinu Tam, we mekel that there's mekel on the left one, we mekel over here also on the shvilei hazera of the left beitza, the Rabbeinu Tam will also be mekel. Okay, now we're going to move into the medical, start dealing with some of the medical issues that come up. We mentioned one, which was the prostate operation, and we'll mention another. Now we're going to go through some procedures that are relevant to fertility treatments. I'm going to point out to you milchatchila in the clearest way possible. I don't paskin anything that has to do with fertility. I don't get involved in those halachas. I did learn it in the past. I still read what comes out on the topic. I do not paskin in that topic b'chlal. I have my reasons for it. I'm not saying them on video. And I send them to other rabbanim to deal with it, preferably not Lubavitcher rabbanim. Not because I don't trust Lubavitchers, it's for my own reason. Now, when a person does not have kids for a certain amount of time, a couple doesn't have kids for a certain amount of time. First of all, what does it mean certain amount of time? As machlekes in today's poskim, it could be a year, 2 years, 10 years. The most extreme ones is 10 years, but then they go deal. There could be a bunch of reasons. Right now, but we're going to discuss today more in the male side of reproduction, because we're still dealing with the male side of reproduction rather than the female side, which is later in the Siman Shulchan Aruch. Now, the way it works, how is a baby done? Yeah, so the Aver produces a certain, what we call noizle hazera, which is semen, which is a liquid, and in it has sperm. So there's semen, and inside the semen there's sperm. There's what we call noizle hazera, in temar in Hebrew, the liquid, and the zera that's inside of it. Every one of these sperm has a little head and a little tail. And the way it works is it pushes its way up through the liquid, and when the woman's ovaries release an egg, and then the zera travels up, the zera that's inside the noizle zera travels, penetrates the egg, fertilizes the egg, and that's how the baby process begins. The zera is produced in the beitzim. The noizle hazera is produced in the prostate. Two different, or outside, not in the beitza. A general person, a regular person, in one beer could produce, usually on average, between 40 to 100 million zera. Sperm. Now it happens to be that as generations go by, there's more pollution, there's more reasons. I saw an interesting study from a month ago, that in the last 50 years, it became half of what it was. Every year it goes down 1% in percentage wise. So in 1973, it was on average 104 million per milliliter, and in 2019 it was 49 million per milliliter. It's more than a half drop between 1979 and 2019. Pretty big drop. So, by definition, today we're going to see there's a little bit more problems of fertility than there used to be. And because there's more problems, so there's more solutions also, more treatment to do it. Now, sometimes the problem is by the male. Sometimes the problem is by the female. Sometimes the problem is just these two, for whatever reason, it's not working out medically between these two, and there is not able to have kids. Now, when it's a problem with the man, there's a few ways it expresses itself. There is sometimes, it's called azospermia, which means that there is no zroim in the noizle hazera, there is no sperm in bichlal in the semen, which could happen for two reasons. Either the shvilim which bring with the zera from the beitza into the noizle zera are blocked for whatever reason. Sometimes it's blocked because they were born like that. Sometimes it's blocked for other reasons. But the pilot's blocked. It's one way of doing it. That's one way of causing it. Sometimes it's caused because somebody had some sort of illness. Sometimes it's done like that, or sometimes laida that the beitzin do not produce any zera, do not produce any sperm. And so if the problem is that the shvil is clogged, so there's operations for that deal with it. And today a lot of poskim will have a discussion how to do, if it's the best way to do it, if it's because you're not doing it for סירוס, you're doing it only for the purpose of giving birth, so it's not a problem. Or there's another way of doing it, that they start looking for zera inside the beitza. Yeah, that's the way to deal with it. Now, sometimes there is zera, but the zera is not able to fertilize the beitza and of the egg that comes from the woman. And the problem is because for the zera to be able to fertilize the beitza, we said it has a head and a tail. It's got to be able to sometimes low sperm count. Pashut, instead of having 49 million or 100 million, it's much less than that. So it just doesn't make it there. Sometimes it doesn't travel properly. It's called sperm motility. And sometimes it's what we call sperm morphology, which is that it just there's a defect the way it's made. So either the head of this is not properly, or the tail is not properly, or one of those things, or it doesn't have a head, doesn't have a tail, or sometimes the problem is in the actual sperm. And what causes this problem? When there's these problems of low sperm count and motility, morphology, it could happen either sometimes it's because of hormonal problems with the man. Sometimes it's genetic. It's genetic issues. Sometimes there are certain medicines which are taken which cause the sperm counts to drop significantly. Sometimes it's an infection which causes it. The infection sometimes is in the beitza, sometimes it's in the shvilim, depending on what it is. Sometimes a person goes through chemotherapy. Also, it burns and it destroys the way of being able to when there is yenamachla in that area. Sometimes it could cause that the person not be able to have kids afterwards. Sometimes it could just be from living in a very polluted place. And the pollution causes changes in the body, which also cause this problems. Or sometimes there are certain chemicals that people use without knowing, and they play around with people's hormones that can have an effect on men, on women. If you see, there's a whole movement and certain shampoos and cosmetics are not using a certain chemical because after a bunch of years, 20 years of using it, studies showed that it did cause a significant drop and played around with the hormones of women, played around with the hormones of men, and created fertility problems. Or somebody is overweight, significantly overweight, and then more fat produces more hormones that could mess around with it. Stress could cause it. Too much alcohol could cause it. All these things could cause it. Yeah. So that is that. So now there is a whole discussion in poskim how to see if the zera has a problem or not. Again, I'm not going to get into discussion on that topic at this moment. But now let's say that there is no zera. They did a test and there is no zera, or there's no zera coming. Like the first one says there is no zera whatsoever in the noizle hazera, and there's no sperm in the semen. And now the woman cannot become pregnant. So there is treatments how to make the woman pregnant, but you can't make a woman pregnant without zera. So you have to find zera. There's different ways to do it. There's a whole bunch of Rashi Tevis. Tell you what it is. One is PESA. One is TEFNA. These are all existing ones. These two are that they put a needle into the beitza and they start checking to see if they just put a needle and they start pulling out liquid and see if they find something. The chesaron with it is you poke something too many times, you cause more damage than good. Then you have a little bit more of a modern technique, which is about 40 years old now, which is TESE, TESA. It's one of the most common ones done today. They take a biopsy they take a little piece from the beitza. It means what they do is first they open up the what's around the beitza, and then they take a little biopsy from the beitza, and they see if they find any zera over there. And sometimes they'll do one biopsy, two biopsies, three biopsies until they find what it is. And that is today commonly known as Dr. Silver's method. And then you have micro tessa, which is what's called Dr. Schlegel's method, which is they slice open the beitza in operation, slice it open it up, look inside, see if they find the zera. If they find, they take out whatever they find, use some of them for making the one pregnant, put the rest in the freezer to use down the line, and close it up, sew it back up, and that's it. The big machlekes between the doctors, which one is better? Today it's either Schlegel's method or Silver's method. One says that the Silver method, that you cut little biopsies, causes more damage over time. And then you have the other people say, no, but Schlegel's method, you cut the whole thing open, causes more damage. And you have Rabbanim which side with each one. Some hold one way, some hold the other way. Then obviously you have the operations which are done to open up How's what? That's the whole, we're going to get to it in a second. That's what we're going to talk about right now.
One is to cut out small pieces.
Yeah.
Take out the whole thing. What's the difference? One is to cut out small pieces.
He says that one, they slice it open in half and they look inside and they close it back up. They cut it and then they close it back up.
Another one,
they take a little piece, they cut a little piece of it, they shave a little piece of it. Now, when it comes to biopsy, they take a little piece of it, a tiny piece of it, or they poke it with a needle. So in Shulchan Shlomo Shem Zalman Auerbach, he says that being that the doctors know how to make sure that it's not going to cause infertility, so therefore it's mutter for that purpose. So it's in Minchas Shlomo, Chele Gimel, Siman Kuf Gimel, Ois Ches. Silver's method. It was Dr. Schlegel's method, wasn't around when he was alive. The Shevet Halevi, Chelik Vav Siman Kuf Tzad Gimel, also says the same thing, that if the doctors are sure and confident that doing this, poking with a needle or taking a biopsy, is not going to cause any damage to cause any סירוס, and it's mutter. That's in Shevet Levi Chelik Vav Siman Kuf Tzad Gimel. It's very interesting tshuva from Kevis Tshuvas of Rav Elyashiv Chelik Gimel Siman Kuf Ayin Aleph. He also says, because it goes back, he says, why is it mutter? Because it cures back, even though they take a tiny piece off, or they poke it with a needle, take a biopsy, poke it with a needle, it's still chayzer lechshere, but he can't be with his wife until chayzer lechshere.
Is there a nekev by the Dr. Silver's method, or by taking?
Yeah, sure.
It's a nekev.
Yeah, take it from around the beitza, yeah. Nukav. And the Minchas Yitzchak also, Minchas Yitzchak says, takes the approach, if you're already doing it, it's better to do it on the left beitza than the right beitza. And therefore, based on these shittas, so if you go and you ask Rabbi Melber from Taharenu or from whatever his organization, I think it used to be called Teres HaMishpacha, he holds that Dr. Silver's method is the best, and not Dr. Schlegel's method, which is cutting it open. Good. So now comes, how do you hold a Schlegel? It's a method that you cut it open and you take things out of it. It's nechsar.
If you use the other one, you're saying go back the whole year waiting to see if shit zera comes out of the neck or not.
They pull it out and they see. That's how they look for shikva zera.
Right, but
it's a tiny needle.
We said that if it's nishtam, you have to.
Unless if the doctors did it, then it's not a problem. If the doctors say that they fixed it, then it's not a problem. Yeah. So in today's day and age, we call it three tshuvas that three main kavim that deal with it, four main kavim deal with it. One is, we'll go with the earliest one, is the Mendel Zilber, the Av Bezin of Esachdas. He wrote tshuva over 40 years ago, Moznei Tzedek, Chelik Aleph, Even Ha'ezar Siman Gimel. He talks about this cutting about the method that used to cut open and see if they could, and take a biopsy out to see if they could find zera. And he explains that the fact that they cut a little bit from the beitza to look for zera, it's not in the category of nifza. Why is that? So even though nechsar ktsas, a little bit is missing, it's still not in the category of nifza. Why? Because to become a krushavcha, when something is cut off, it's only, or pseudaka is only if you can't give birth because of what you did. That what you did, the סירוס, this cutting that you did was what caused you to not be able to have kids. So as he starts by saying that svara. He says that krushavcha, pseudaka, these things, the isur is that what you do, the action caused not to have kids. Caused not to be able to have kids. Over here, the action is not what causes not to have kids. By krushavcha, he says you can't say it's a krushavcha. First point, you can't say it's a krushavcha. Why? Because krushavcha is that he can't have any more kids. Over here, that's not what it is. He says, well, maybe you could say it's a pseudaka. If we say it's a pseudaka, then we know that nechsar mashu is already possible. So he says, so then we have to go into discussion. What's mashu? He says you can't say that such a minimal amount that they cut is considered mashu. Nechsar kolshu, kolshu. He says kolshu is not an infinite amount. It's not the smallest amount possible. Kolshu, when you look in Gemara, he brings a bunch of rice from Gemara. It's a long tshuva. Bring a bunch of rice from Gemara. Kolshu means that it's smaller than the shear that has a shear. So let's say if there's something which is a shear is kazayis or chesed kazayis or something, then kolshu is much smaller than that, but it's still something. So he says that this such a tiny amount that they use for a biopsy does not make the person puzzle. He says it makes no difference if they're doing beitza yemanis and beitza smalis, it's all fine. And then he says more so. What's kol shehu? Kol shehu, that nechsar kol shehu is not nechsar kol shehu from any place in the beitza. It's nechsar kol shehu from the place where the beitza is mevashel l'shechva zera, not where it's stored. So where they cut it from, they don't cut it from the inside where it's being stored, or when it's being made. They cut it from the outside where it's just being stored. So if it's cut from the outside, just being stored, that's not in the category of the nechsar that's asur according to halacha. And he concludes, he says, B'poil, we see that a lot of people gave birth afterwards, after such a operation. Is the most as long as the charaya, that's not asur. Because a lot of people gave birth afterwards. There's actually true with Tzemach Tzedek, which similarly says, not about the operation, obviously, in Siman Tezayin of the Tzemach Tzedek, where he says, he finishes that when it comes that yesh lahavi raya min achush, you have to look and see if it's possible mitzias, if something that the doctors do and that doesn't cause a person to not be able to give birth, then l'chayra shouldn't be a problem. Tzemach Tzedek is only matir b'tziruf of another suffix, but I'm saying this is how what the Maznei Tzedek writes. That's the first one I'm going to discuss. He didn't not have kids because if they do operation, somebody could have kids. He has kids, but he has it from his own zera and his own and his wife's beitza, his wife's egg. He says it's not. She doesn't change the status of the person. The person, if he wasn't able to have kids before, is not able to have kids now. In a natural form, you didn't do anything. You weren't mesadas anything. You didn't do anything. You don't have to take it. As we see people that even afterwards, sometimes they did have babies in a natural manner.
But if you say that happened according to that, then you said one of this is because of brutal rules. So the guy can't have children naturally.
He could have children naturally. He has zera in his body. He has zera. It's very hard to find. That's why they look and they find. That's how all these things are done to find it inside. Not every person. I'm sure that didn't.
Whatever. Then this time his shvilim. So then how can he be married? I'm saying if one of the reasons is is because of prurivul, like the third reason you mentioned.
Yeah, but because
What's the physical action of cutting it off or whatever, taking a drink? If he drinks whatever.
Kosher cream is not also bakol. If it's temporary, it's not.
If he drinks something, he besides himself with drinking. Not
For permanently?
Yeah.
Oh, permanently something else. Yeah.
So
It's
why?
a discussion.
Naturally, you can't. They find that after you're married, right?
You mean they should get divorced?
I'm asking.
Because still, it's because it's not a klushav p'tzudaka. Klushav p'tzudaka is an action that happened in the shvilim, which go all the way into the body, according to the Rebbe.
I'm asking, might not be whatever.
Because it's not. What am I asking? Because we're not going to add more to the Isser than what the Isser already is. The Shulchan Aruch says you have 3 places that you can become Aser, Gid, Beitzim, Shvilim, and that's it. We're not looking for more places to make a person Aser. That's what it is.
I'll ask you after.
Now, in Shas HaTshuvas Meishiv Nevoinim, which is Rav Steinmetz, which is a Dayan of Skver in Borough Park, and he's also the Pesach of Eitam. Not the Pesach of Eitam, sorry, Pesach of Bnei Olam. Be careful, we'll mix up the organizations. Chelik Aleph Siman Samachei, he discusses the Dr. Schlegel's method, and he says, goes also into the Chaser Mashu. He says he discusses Schlegel's method over there. They cut it open and then they take something out of it. So it's chaser. Chaser says, chaser mashu should be aser. He says, no, chaser mashu means that it's nikar, that you could see that something was chaser. Over here, what they do is they cut it open, take something from the inside, and you close it back up, and not nikar that anything is chaser. Second of all, this operation is for the purpose of giving birth, the purpose of helping a person give birth. And therefore, he says that it's mutter. He discusses that method versus Dr. Silva's method. It's not machriya which one is better halachically. The Binyamin Zev Landau, who is the Dayan of Tashenbar Park, was the Pesach of Eitam, he goes into the opinion why Dafka Schlegel's method is the best one of all of them. It was a letter written to Rav Elyashiv, and over there he writes that not only there's no problem with Dr. Schlegel's method of cutting it open and taking it from inside, it's even a much better way. Why? He says, he gives a few reasons. Reason number 1, the regular one, they take a bunch of biopsies until they find something. Right? So therefore, the more times you cut somebody open, even if you just do a tiny cut, the more chances there is of problems. So it could cause more hezek. But in Dr. Schlegel's method, they cut it open once, they see what's inside, they take out whatever's there, and that's it. It's once, they heals back and shine. Shalom al Yisrael. Why? Over there, they don't just go like sumo baruba, like a blind person just pulling out the little things and then checking them outside until they find something, like cutting a salami. Rather, they do it in a way that they open it up, they look with a microscope, they see, they take it out, and that's it. And it gets cured. And it's not nikar at all. There's no chas, there's no nechsar, which is visible nechsar, and it becomes cured within a few days, and therefore it is much better halachically. So there are 2 shit. There's no achra on this. I told you, certain rabbanim which are paisik one way, certain which are paisik another way. 3 organizations, or 4 organizations, or 5 organizations today, I know, that deal with helping people on these matters. And each one of them has their own paisik, and their own paisik has their own svaris, and some will encourage you one way, some will encourage you the other way. I'm not paisik in any of them. I just want to discuss the shilas that come up, how people deal with the shilas, just understand. And today, what nechsar, the only reason I brought this up is not because I'm passing on fertility, but simply to show you the discussion about nechsar. If nechsar kol shehu, how do you define kol shehu? If it's kol shehu is just a shear smaller than the previous shear, if it's because it's nikar, if it's not nikar, if it's from the inside of the beitzah and it's not nikar bichlal. Sometimes it could be not nikar even if it's in the outside of the beitzah, depending on which one you follow. Now there's a whole other field to discuss, which is when people have yana machla and they have to deal with taking out one of the beitzim or both of them, or dealing with some of the shvilim, etc. And if a person becomes asur bakol based on that, there's also somebody taket does an operation, and didn't know this, or does an operation to block his if he's asur bakol, vasectomy. What the din is, if there's a chiyuv to fix it, the whole discussion about it, and also that's regarding the medical aspect of it. And you move on to סירוס Isha. At certain times the child is born and they have hernias or they have something, they have to move, the beitzim didn't move down into the right place, and they have to deal with it in different kinds of surgeries, and it becomes a whole shaila how to deal with it, what the best way of doing these things are. And obviously with סירוס Isha, what the din is, what the issur is by סירוס Isha, סירוס al yedei goy, סירוס behema, there's a bunch of other topics that we're going to get to in the next shir in Yirtzeh Hashem. And with that we'll conclude. Next year will probably be on Monday.